Hey, I'm super excited about this podcast because in this series of podcasts, we're going to be talking about how you can be more effective and how your mindset can play a massive part in your effectiveness. And with me today, I'm honoured and I'm thrilled and I'm excited to have Hans Schulter here. Welcome, Hans.
Wonderful to be with you, Paul.
Hey, the reason I'm so excited about you being here, Hans, is you've obviously joined the SalesStar faculty as one of our coaches, but you come with a wealth of experience.
Some say that.
Around what's really important, which is the top 6 inches.
100%.
Yeah. So Hans's background, and you'll fill in the blanks here,
Sure.
but Hans is studying this and he's almost done a master's degree in neuropsychology. So what that means for us and our clients is that most people know that we at SalesStar have become experts at evaluating this thing called mindset and how that supports or sabotages our sales effectiveness.
Absolutely.
Not just sales, but leadership as well. But the real interesting thing is that Hans is able to wrap some science around why certain things happen, and in particular, some of the solutions that we provide for our clients, how that actually works from a scientific point of view. So what is neuropsychology?
Paul, there's a lot of talk about how the brain works, and the brain is incredibly complex. We know that. But within neuropsychology, we're trying to understand what are the main functions, what are the main drivers behind behavior, how we feel, habits, those kinds of things. So
Right.
It's really trying to understand at a very base level
Yeah.
what drives our behavior and the other things that make us do what we do.
Right. So for old dogs like myself, can the brain be retrained? Can you teach an old dog new tricks? Or?
So that's a great question. It's a great question. So there's a prevailing thought out there that once you become an adult, you can't learn new things, right? We've heard that, the old dog new trick thing.
Yeah.
Well, scientifically, that's completely wrong. And
Gives me hope.
Absolutely. And it's a concept called neurogenesis. Right? So the creation of new connections, or the actual creation of new neurons. It's a very different thing to what people talk about neuroplasticity at times. I think we'll get into that at some stage in this podcast. But neurogenesis, Paul, is the ability for your brain to create new neurons. People think that once you've got all of your neurons, that's pretty much it. But that's actually not true. There's a fantastic piece of your brain called the hippocampus. There's actually 2 places in an adult brain where new neurons are formed all the time. One of them has got to do with your olfactory nerve, which is your smell, believe it or not.
Right.
Which is actually primary in keeping you safe.
Yep.
And it's an evolutionary thing.
Yeah.
All right.
Smell if there's enemy near.
All of that stuff,
Yeah.
anything dangerous, right?
Yep.
The other side is actually the back of your hippocampus where your memories are formed.
Right.
And so your brain is constantly able to create new neurons where new memories can be formed. And this is where it becomes really interesting in people saying, well, I don't believe I could learn a new trick or learn a new skill or learn anything. It's actually scientifically not correct.
So it's scientifically proven that's not a correct statement.
Absolutely.
So we can challenge our clients on that. That's perhaps not a true statement. That might be a self-limiting belief.
That's exactly what it is.
It's a self-limiting. Hey, so what I want to do is focus on perhaps the 2 parts of mindset that enables you to be highly effective or can sabotage your effectiveness. And I think we should start off with the will to sell. So as you know, when we evaluate for sales effectiveness, we're looking from a will to sell point of view, we're looking at those 4 crucial elements, which is desire, commitment, responsibility, and outlook. But if we sort of just wrap the bow on that, that really determines how motivated a salesperson or a sales manager, for that matter, is. And there's been a lot of case studies written about having goals and having goals in writing. I mean,
Absolutely.
Can you put some sort of scientific evidence that having goals and goals in writing is a formula for success?
Absolutely. So in order to really highlight this, let's talk about memory for a minute, right? So I think when it comes to neuroscience and how the brain works and how behavior works, psychology is a It's an amazing science. It's an amazing area. But a lot of people never really think, well, how does my memory work, for instance? Yep. So, I mean, I'll ask you, Paul, what is the first memory you have in your life? Or can you remember your first memory?
One that kind of stands out, I might have been a little bit younger than 3 years old. I was walking, so it was about 2.5, and so we were living in Singapore. My dad was in the New Zealand Army, so my mother was walking me around one of the local markets, and she was in a bit of a hurry. I remember her holding my hand, and she was dragging me through the markets.
As mothers do.
And, and in a bit of a rush. Yeah. And you know, the Asians like to smoke, and so this is way back in the 70s, and a person's cigarette butt hit my hand, and it burned me.
Wow.
And I remember that, and I started crying, and my mum didn't know why I was crying, and I couldn't explain, but the cigarette butt had burnt my hand.
Your hand.
Yeah.
So you were in a market, right?
Correct.
What was it? A wet market, dry market? What did it smell like?
It was. I remember it partly being wet. It was kind of fishy. Smelled like a lot of herbs, and it smelled quite nasty. To be fair, if you weren't accustomed to that type of smell, it wasn't something that you'd be excited about revisiting.
Interesting. Do you remember how you felt? Do you remember a feeling, an emotion? Do you remember that?
I remember feeling in pain, and I remember feeling my mum didn't show any emotion to why I was crying.
Interesting. Very interesting. So what you've described is, so you said the 1970s, Paul, so you kind of let the cat out of the bag on your youthful...
Yeah.
What we're talking about here is...
It's a long time ago.
It's a long time. So maybe 40 plus years worth of time that's passed between that experience and today, and yet you're able to vividly recall that memory. You know, we all have that. Now, you know, I'm asking you to remember a childhood memory, but life is built up of learning and memories, and that translates into what we would call a network. So in neuroscience, we deal with a concept called LTP, or long-term potentiation. It's just a fancy word for memory. Right. And really LTP is a very complex network within your brain that for some reason has been formed and is now in a basal state, constantly firing a low level of electricity and a low level of chemical. Because that's actually what a memory is. It's an electrical chemical network inside your mind which constantly cycles until it needs to be called upon. And because it was so important, it came up. Now in your young life, that feeling of danger, the smell, your mom dragging you, and the feeling that you hadn't got the attention that you needed was obviously very impactful, created a powerful connection which has constantly got electricity and chemicals flowing in it. And if you now apply that to, a business, you apply that to some of the fear that we might feel when we're trying to close or when we're trying to pick up the phone or those kinds of things, we're talking about networks.
Yeah.
And so if we've got a network that we've created, you could also argue that we could, through neuroplasticity, change it. And you were speaking about mindset. You were talking about those big four and how to change them. This is the answer.
Well, I think fear is a really big topic and something we'll circle back to because I think fear thwarts us from attaining our goals. Absolutely. Right? We set some big ambitious goals, and I think having those goals will determine how successful we are. Like I think if you think big, like we are at SalesStar, even if you got halfway there, you're going to be super successful.
Absolutely.
But I know that the thing that thwarts us from achieving those goals is often when we hit that barrier. It's called fear. And often people go, it's too confronting. They won't break through that fear barrier. So what they decide to do is choose a lesser goal. So they substitute their main goal, which really drives them in their purpose and their passion, to settle on something that's probably less than what they really desire. So let's talk about fear soon, but let's go back to maybe how do you use your brain and the networks in your brain to form maybe a really powerful goal to keep you on track, to keep you motivated, can you talk to us a little
Absolutely.
bit about that?
Well, let's talk about a goal and really what it is, right? Goal is a formation of an idea, and it's really getting it into a concrete form, okay? So once we've had a thought and we've actually concreted it, that gives us the ability to start to work on creating a new network. So why did we tell the story about LTP, the Singaporean market, and the cigarette burn? Is to highlight the fact that you created a pathway, let's call it a pathway, in your mind, which can be revisited at any time, positively or negatively, right? Now, think about a goal. If we have a goal, something we want to actually achieve, and we elicit certain tools, now that might be what we would call coaching or embedding or affirmation type scenario, then really what we're doing is we're creating, first of all, a new network, and then over time strengthening that network. So in fact, we can teach ourselves, put away that old network, and hey, why don't we choose this new network instead? Now think about a paddock, and think about cows moving through a paddock. If you put cows into a paddock today and they just wander around, you don't really see much evidence of that. But if you put cows into that paddock for 3 months and all of those cows follow each other back to back to the milking station, you'll see after 3 months there'll be a very clear path through that paddock.
Yep.
And all the cows will want to go on that one path.
Yeah.
So think about that in your mind. When you set a goal and then put a really powerful process around it, reminding you, helping you, filling in skill, building your resilience, following that path day after day after day after day, after 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, you've got a new path to choose versus an old path that may have been actually stopping you getting to where you wanted to go. And that's how coaching is so powerful. That's why embedding versus training is just so powerful. It takes time. It takes time. Like cows moving through a paddock to make a new pathway takes a bit of time. But that's when it becomes really powerful for a person.
So that's really interesting because, they say that top 5% of successful people have goals in writing.
Absolutely.
And that once you're actually clear on your goal and, it's visible on a daily basis, you can actually manifest that goal coming true. So you've just kind of explained how that manifestation process works.
Happens actually. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? People, what I found the most, and this is disconcerting at times, is that people look at goals, affirmations, coaching, that kind of thing, and they think there's a magical aspect to it. Now, there are some powerful forces that come into play, like momentum and teamwork and that kind of thing. But in reality, if we really break it down to the nucleus of the problem, what we're doing is we're trying to help people create new ways of thinking, giving them an opportunity. And remember, we think along neuronal networks. Our brain works in networks.
So here's an interesting concept. Like when we're working with high-performing teams and we're getting clear on what success looks like for every individual salesperson, so having a goal that's clear and obtainment and breaking that down into the activity, so they've actually got a compass on how they're going to get to their goals, like that's one part of the equation. But kind of you touched a little bit earlier on about creating that culture, that leadership. So what evidence from a neuropsychology point of view does leadership and fostering a culture to help salespeople be more effective?
Very interesting.
Give us some context around.
Okay, that's a very interesting question, and it actually goes back to some of the fundamental arguments in psychology. This really takes us back to the nature versus nurture debate, right? Yeah. So what we mean by that is how much of me is a function of being born the way I am. Well, I am the way I am, right? And how much of me is a function of the experiences, the nurturing or lack of nurturing that I've had in my life? How much of that has contributed to who I am? The answer is there's obviously a fair mix of both, all right? So you could imagine that a culture within a business that nurtures. And remember, nurturing, someone might think, well, nurturing is coddling. That's not particularly true. Nurturing is helping people achieve their potential.
Yeah.
That's what real nurture is. So if you create a leadership structure, management structure, and a culture that allows people to set goals, fail forward, learn new things in a safe environment with a powerful process that gives them boundaries to move within to create these new networks, you can just imagine how powerful that is for a team and for an individual, and then for a team collectively, and for an organization, and for a society. How these things move ahead is quite extraordinary.
Absolutely. Nature versus nurture, let's dive into that. Often when we're evaluating salespeople, one of the components of their will to sell and their success is desire. And sometimes the desire level isn't where it should be, so it can be quite low. And the problem that has is that when there's low desire, generally there's complacency, or there's not the fire in the belly to really want to go out there and be successful. So, I kind of looked at this as a kind of innate thing. That's just the way that person was born. But on the flip side of the coin, if someone had low desire, maybe that was their disposition, that they weren't really goal driven, that they had a lower desire. If you nurtured in the right environment, if you created the right environment to nurture a person with low desire, can you move the dial on that level of desire?
Absolutely. I would say there's a base need. Now, there probably is a personality reality, right? But let me ask you this question. Have you played on a sports team before?
Yes.
Rugby team or something like
rugby,
that, right?
Soccer,
okay.
hockey.
Well, there you go. We all have, right? And in a team, you've always got those hardcore, go get it, crush the other team guys, right? Or teammates. And then you've got the thinkers that maybe, or the jokers that aren't quite as driven from a personality or desire perspective. But what I found is with a high-performing team, when you get that team together and everybody's focused on one thing, there's a momentum that starts, and all of a sudden these people that seem to not have that natural desire, they can filter into a team and play a massive role. And you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. On the day of winning, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between somebody who has that natural desire, someone who doesn't, but is working towards a common goal on the day and is feeling the feeling of winning, the feeling. So why do we bring that up? The reality is a lot of people want to pigeonhole people. They want to understand people in a pigeonholed way. Yes. But one thing that I have seen, and this is through my practice, obviously working with you guys and through the history of working with people, is that everybody has unwritten potential waiting to come out. And somebody who has been labeled as a desireless person all of their life, there's, believe me, a neuronal network inside there that's reinforcing that all the time. And if we can help them understand, create a new pathway, we have people with amazing skills that if we just correct that little thing, they become superstars.
We can unlock that potential. That's pretty damn exciting.
That's the point that's so powerful.
And the interesting thing, if we can unlock that desire, because often we go into companies and they're saying, Johnny's not performing, they need sales training. But from our experience, sales training is pretty much the last thing we should be looking at. Evaluating a person to see what's going on from a mindset point of view, to see if they've got the strong will to sell or if there's psychological things stopping them, is the first thing we should look at. Because without that strong desire, and we provide sales training skills to an individual, they're not going to go and execute. But if we diagnose before we prescribe, and if we recognize that there is a lack of desire, what you're telling me is that we can work in a different way with that individual to lift their desire levels up before applying sales training.
Absolutely. And so, if we metaphorically talk about superpowers, and we talk about kryptonite.
Right?
There you go.
Yeah.
So every superhero has certain kryptonites that are slowing them down, taking away their power. That doesn't mean that they're not superheroes when the kryptonite's not around. So I think one of the fundamental responsibilities of a great leader and a great culture is to help understand, what kryptonites do my superheroes have? And how do we create an environment where we can mitigate the kryptonites? And that could be a lot of brain work, that could be a process work, that could be a skill work, so that they can go out and, slay the dragons, get the jobs done.
I guess first and foremost you need to have some tools available to evaluate what that kryptonite looks like.
Well, putting science behind understanding what's holding your people back is probably one of the most powerful things you could ever do. It's one of the greatest gifts you could give to a superhero who just doesn't know why, when they get to a certain problem and they're just about to save the day, and
something holds them back.
Their flying power goes.
Yeah.
They lose their flying power and they fall out of the sky, and
they lose all their confidence.
Do you know how frustrating that is for that superhero?
Oh, I know. I've been.
It's a nightmare, right? So bringing that back to the work environment. Think about a person who really wants to make it, is a great team member.
Okay. I think this is a really good segue to say, hey, look, this has been an absolutely fantastic podcast, and talking about the things that really fire us up and give us that latent energy and turn us into superpowers. In this next series, we're going to be talking about the kryptonite, the things that disempower us, the things that thwart us from being successful. And why don't we do this? Why don't we touch on maybe the things that hold us back from fear and how we can break through those fear barriers.
No worries, that'll be great.
All right. I hope you found that valuable. If you want to know more, please reach out and we'll be happy to chat to you. We'll see you in the next episode.